It sounds like something right out of a bad Hallmark movie. An Oregon romance novelist who wrote an essay entitled How to Murder Your Husband is actually accused of murdering her husband. She claims she's innocent.
During this trial, the state will present a circumstantial case that begs you to cast a blind eye to the most important circumstance of all. What's that? Well, it's love.
Now, a jury will decide. And Portland is continuing its long tradition of protesters setting up camp and refusing to leave. This time, it's in solidarity with those living on the streets.
We'll just keep erecting these all around. Every time there's a sweep, we'll put more up because the city needs to stop doing sweeps.
Here's The Story. I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. All the ways to communicate with us right there at the bottom of your screen. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com. You can use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter, or you can leave us a good old-fashioned voicemail. Just call our phone number, 503-226-5090. We're going to begin tonight with the start of a murder trial, one of those stories that seems stranger than fiction. A couple from Beaverton, the husband a well-loved and well-known culinary instructor here in Portland, murdered on a summer morning 4 years ago at the cooking school. The wife, a romance novelist who once wrote an essay entitled How to Kill Your Husband, now accused of doing that very thing. We don't cover trials very often on this show, but we could not resist this one. Let's have Galen Etlin show us how we got here.
In June 2018, students at the former Oregon Culinary Institute found the popular instructor shot, and he soon died.
He made such an impact, obviously, on so many people.
Nancy was at Daniel's memorial that June as police looked for the killer. Then, months later, they arrested her in September. Grieving friends and students were divided.
I was completely shocked and disgusted. Especially somebody that's been with him for as long as she had been with him could just do something so cold-hearted.
I can't imagine. I just don't think she's capable.
Police knew when Daniel entered the Culinary Institute. Nancy told them she was home at the time, but court documents say this surveillance showed her car driving through the area.
I don't know what could be more pivotal, Your Honor, than her being at the exact time and place that a murder is occurring when no one else is there, and then she lies about it.
Nancy surrendered a gun to police that matched the murder weapon, but police said at first it appeared to be unused. Later, they said eBay records showed she bought a new slide and barrel. Her defense pointed out police never found duplicate parts.
It's possible that it was involved in the murder, but it's also possible that it wasn't. It's possible.
The more sensational part of this case comes from Nancy's past work, writing romance novels.
She authored a whole series, including The Wrong Hero, The Wrong Lover, and The Wrong Husband. The question is Crampton-Brophy the right suspect in this real-life murder?
Her neighbor wasn't so sure.
But you never know. It could go one way, it could go the other.
Nancy also penned a blog titled How to Murder Your Husband in 2011. Friends say writing that blog as a fiction writer does not prove she's the killer.
She's just not that type of person. She wasn't some conniving, don't care, don't give a darn type person. This is a woman who truly loved her husband.
Audio of Nancy speaking to investigators shows some of that emotion.
I don't care about who shot him, I just want him back. I don't want him dead.
But prosecutors maintain Nancy stood to gain $1.5 million in life insurance and other funds from her husband's death, from the neighbor who said it could go either way.
I'm not ready to convict her, and I don't think it's right to do that.
There's nothing quite like opening statements in a high-profile murder trial like this. It's a chance for both the prosecutor and the defense to make their first impressions on the jury. The state lays out a roadmap of what they believe the story to be behind the murder. Why did it happen? How did it happen? What sort of planning went into it? The defense, of course, will try to sow seeds of doubt in the jury. Maybe the evidence does not show what the state says it does. Maybe they have the wrong person on trial. I gotta tell you, I've covered several cases like this, and when you're there in the courtroom, it's the most fascinating thing that you've ever seen. More than a movie, more than a performance. Now, we can't take you there physically, but we can give you a taste through video. First up, the prosecutor, Sean Overstreet, with the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office, who explained that Nancy, the accused killer, met the victim, her husband Dan, when she attended the culinary school. He was her teacher. Eventually they got married. Later they ran into financial troubles. I'll warn you, at the very beginning his audio is not great, so we've got closed captioning that we're putting on the screen for you. Then we're going to hear from the defense team. Here's part of the state's opening statement.
The financial struggles really began to develop in 2016 as the two struggled to pay their $1,530 mortgage starting in June of that year. At one point, they even drained their only retirement account, a 401k, that had about $35,000 in it. And they also took a $5,000 loan on a life insurance policy. They used that money to catch up on mortgages, on the mortgage, to pay for home renovations, landscaping, pay the IRS, pay for some travel, housekeeping, storage, and Ms. Brophy spent about $1,500 of that money on guns and gun parts. They were also spending well over $1,000 each month on life insurance premiums. Due to a pattern of overspending, they were on track again to be in financial despair within months. By late 2017, financial despair evident and no end in sight, as their mortgage just continued to rise due to a mortgage rate increase. Nancy started researching and planning the murder of Dan Brophy. Nancy started first by researching ghost guns online. Ghost guns are available for purchase online. They are marketed as unserialized, unregistered, and untraceable firearms. They sell them as a kit online.
The prosecutor showed the jury this video of Nancy's dark-colored van driving toward the camera the morning of the murder. It's also driving toward the cooking school. Then later, Dan Brophy's white pickup, also seen arriving at the culinary school. The prosecutor argues Nancy surprised her husband inside after he had opened up the school for the day.
Nancy shot him first in the back, penetrating his spine, piercing through his heart. After Dan fell onto his back, possibly paralyzed from the first shot, Nancy fired one more round into his chest, also piercing through Dan's heart. The medical examiner concluded that either shot could have been fatal.
The prosecutor hammered home on the financial motive, saying investigators found 10 different life insurance policies. Plus, Nancy Brophy would get the equity in their home and also get payments from workers' comp because her husband died at work. Of course, there is another side to this case, today argued by veteran defense lawyer Lisa Maxfield. She told the jury there were a bunch of life insurance policies because Nancy Brophy used to sell life insurance and made a commission off selling them to others, but also to herself. And she said there's one big reason her client did not kill her husband.
During this trial, the state will present a circumstantial case that begs you to cast a blind eye to the most important circumstance of all. What's that? Well, it's love. 24 years, 10 months, 2 days. From the first day of their marriage to the last, Nancy Brophy was grateful. She had a husband who was adventurous, loving, playful, and she knew it was a rare gift. Nancy Crampton-Brophy has always been thoroughly, madly, crazy in love with Daniel Brophy, and she still is today. And Dan Brophy was in love with her, so much so that he talked to both his male and female friends about how much he appreciated his marriage. He was a wonderful man. And for Nancy Brophy, he was perfect. Their friends, no matter how they knew them, considered their marriage to be exemplary, even delightful.
Nancy Brophy is in court. There she is there in the light blue sweater. Her attorney said she will take the stand in her own defense later. Ms. Maxfield conceded the Brophies had money trouble before the murder and said it was because of a delay in commissions being paid, but she insisted they had it worked out.
It is this period of time, in the summer and fall of 2017, that the state focuses on when it tells you that the Brophies were desperate, that the Brophies were broke, that the Brophies were feeling a financial catastrophe that caused Nancy Brophy to murder her husband. It is true. In August of 2017, money was very tight for the Brophies. But again, Dan and Nancy came up with a plan that offset the delay in the commission payments.
She also conceded that Nancy Brophy bought a ghost gun kit that's untraceable, but said that was just part of her immersive writing style, and it helped her in writing a book of fiction about a woman who was being abused and used such a gun to save herself.
Ms. Brophy was fascinated with her storyline, and she went back to those sites several times over the next few weeks. So as to better describe her protagonist's experience, Ms. Brophy considered whether she should buy a gun kit and put it together as she wrote the book. On Christmas Eve, after a couple of glasses of wine, Ms. Brophy splurged and she bought herself a gun kit from one of those two sites in the New York Times article, ghostguns.com. She thought of the purchase as kind of a jigsaw puzzle where she could put a gun together from pieces. That week after New Year's, Dan and Nancy Brophy went to Sook Harbor, British Columbia, for a romantic getaway. Dan put a hold on their mail. When they returned to Portland, Dan went to the post office to pick up the mail. He brought the gun kit home.
So as you can see, two very different stories going on for this trial. It's expected it could last as long as 7 weeks. We're going to dip in and visit from time to time, especially when Nancy Brophy takes the stand. Now, let's turn to Portland's homeless crisis. We're going to talk about another camp tonight, but it's not a homeless camp in the traditional sense. Activists have set this one up with their own tents in the Pearl District to protest sweeps against those who live on the streets. The city says it plans to clear this new camp next week, but Christelle Kumwe talked to the protesters who say they're ready to push back.
Good, how are you?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Wooden pellets on hand, dozens of volunteers showed up in the Pearl District Sunday morning ready to work.
I help support folks on the street in whatever way I can. All the people who are here do the same thing.
Mimi German spearheaded this effort to build 3 housing structures for the houseless at the intersection of Northwest Davis and Park.
At every turn, there's a sweep.
The move, she says, is in response to the city's sweeps of homeless camps. The plan is to erect these tents right here in the park to house people like this woman who didn't want to appear on camera but says her camp was recently cleared.
Like really early, like 7:45, it was 8 o'clock when I woke up to them taking my tent down with me in their sleep.
The group faced pushback Sunday. Portland Police and Portland Parks and Rec wanted to see a permit. Instead, they were handed a piece of legislation.
House Bill 4001 that allows nonprofits and religious organizations during an emergency housing crisis to provide shelter in the city.
But city workers were not familiar with the bill, and here's why. According to the Oregon legislature website, HB 4001 was recommended to pass in 2020, but the session ended before it was finalized. People in the neighborhood had mixed feelings about the project.
18 years ago, we'd walk through this park
with our grandchildren
at night, and we think, can you believe how cool this is?
Phil and Debbie Esther say the neighborhood deteriorated over the years with crime, drug usage, and mental health concerns with the homeless population. The couple is all for the group providing services and support at the park,
but not to live here.
Neighbor Dave Taylor agrees.
It's terrible down here. Just all the drugs and, people being homeless and needing help.
But welcomes the tents here to help the homeless.
That's awesome. It's great.
After the 3 main tents were up, volunteers pitched dozens of smaller ones around the park, ignoring calls from police to stop the work.
We'll just keep erecting these all around. Every time there's a sweep, we'll put more up because the city needs to stop doing sweeps.
Christelle Kumwe, KGW News.
This is a tactic we've seen protesters in Portland use before, so let's go into the KGW vault. A year ago in April 2021, activists set up these large tents called Tarpies to send a message to the city about the housing crisis. They were originally used during the Standing Rock protests in 2016. Last year, protesters set them up along the Peninsula Crossing Trail in North Portland. Some campers moved into them, and activists used them as an example of the kind of organized camps they think the city should start building. A month later, activists gathered at Laurelhurst Park in southeast Portland to try and stop the city from sweeping the homeless camp there. The group Stop the Sweep said they were there to make the campers food and provide them protection from the city. But a lot of the neighbors told us the park was becoming unsafe and they wanted the city to clear it out. That eventually did happen a few months later, although some campers eventually then came back to the park. In 2020, protesters set up in front of the so-called Red House on North Mississippi. Activists were trying to prevent a black and indigenous family from being evicted from their foreclosed home. The family raised a bunch of money on GoFundMe, and the protests mostly fizzled out. But the family has not said if they actually bought the house back or not. And this isn't just a tactic used for homeless or housing-related demonstrations. Remember Occupy ICE protests in 2018? People set up camp outside the Immigration and Customs Enforcement building in southwest Portland to protest the Trump administration's family separation policy. They stayed there for 5 weeks until the city cleared them out. And then there was the original Occupy Portland protest back in 2011. It was part of the larger Occupy Wall Street movement. Protesters set up camp in Chapman and Lonsdale squares downtown. They stayed for more than a month until the city eventually kicked them out.
80 years ago, a major newspaper in the Pacific Northwest covered the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Now, the current staff of the Seattle Times is revisiting that coverage and talking about how they would do things differently today.
It's my hope that as we look back, we're also looking forward, we're looking at our present day coverage, and we're learning from what we did in the past.
When the story continues.
Welcome back. Keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com or give us a call, leave a voicemail at 503-226-5090. We really do want to hear from you, want to read your comments, listen to your voicemails. We want this to be a dialogue. All right, let's get to something that we think is worth your time. The Seattle Times just published a new project called A1 Revisited. It's a look back at the newspaper's coverage of Japanese Americans in the U.S. being forcefully removed from their homes and put into internment camps during World War II. The first place in the country this happened was on Bainbridge Island in Washington 80 years ago. For this new project, the Times is scrutinizing their front page coverage from March 30th, 1942, word for word. They're highlighting problems in the stories like racist depictions, photos from the war that influenced the narrative, and staged portraits that inaccurately depicted internment. For example, the newspaper at the time described the forceful removal of more than 200 people from their homes as an orderly evacuation. Here's what the project's editor told our sister station in Seattle.
We used racist slurs. We used inaccurate language. It was centered on the white residents of Bainbridge Island and how sad they felt to be losing their friends, and on the soldiers who were crying. There was even a line that says that, the soldiers were crying, but the Japanese American, did not say Japanese American, residents were mostly stoic and smiling. And it's very odd. It's my hope that as we look back, we're also looking forward, we're looking at our present day coverage, and we're learning from what we did in the past and just always trying to be better journalists.
Yes, we all are. She says many newspapers at the time ran one-sided editorials justifying internment. The one rare exception was the Bainbridge Island Review, which condemned the internment and followed residents from the island to the internment camp south of Seattle. If you want to check out the entire project from the Seattle Times, we have a link to it at kgw.com. Coming up after the break, a woman in the small town of Gates, where many homes were destroyed by fire, looks past her own loss to raise millions for her community. Her inspiring example is up next. Fire victims. And I know a lot of you watching did, because we raised a ton of money on this show. Thank you for that. Well, now USA Today is honoring one of the survivors who decided to use some of the donations that she got to help others instead. Christine Pitawanich has her story.
We first spoke with Cindy Sharon and her family in September of 2020. They had just found out that their home in Gates had burned down. But now, a little over a year and a half later, and they are in the middle of a rebuild. And Sharon has received some national recognition.
That's what we really, really wanted, was nice and open. And
Cindy Sharon and her family have come a long way since Labor Day weekend in 2020. This is what she and her husband's property looked like when wildfire tore through the Santiam Canyon.
oh my God. Oh my God. It was never anything we ever thought we would have to go through. That's that hillside that was on fire, that was sparking across the river when we left.
It's taken a lot of work to get where they are now. Her husband, Brian, is doing pretty much all of the rebuild on his own.
Building prices were so expensive. Cleanup took a long time, like so many other people.
Their new home is in the home stretch, and to top it off, Sharon is one of USA Today's Women of the Year. These women recognized for their resilience and drive to help their communities.
It's pretty amazing to be even thought to even be in that group. I was kind of in shock.
Here's the backstory. In the weeks after the fire, Sharon began receiving donations from family and friends. But instead of using that money for her own needs, she donated it to the Santiam Canyon Wildfire Relief Fund, a nonprofit she and her friend, Dina Freris, started to help wildfire survivors. It has raised nearly $4 million.
I just had an idea. I had an idea of what I wanted to happen.
Sharon is humbled by the award, but doesn't feel it's hers alone. The community here in the canyon is close, she says, like family.
I think everybody kind of felt like it was their award too, because we were all in this together. And I never felt like it was just me. I felt like it was us.
She is one of the most inspiring people. As for the house, Sharon says she's hopeful it'll be done by July. In Gates, Christine Petawanich, KGW News.
Thanks, Christine. Keep your questions and comments coming to the story at kgw.com. We'll finish the show with some good news and a way you can help our community right after this. I do about our Hey Help campaign. We're asking you to donate to Cultivate Initiatives. They're a nonprofit based in East Portland that offers various programs to help homeless people enter the workforce and get into housing. They also hold community health clinics. If you would like to donate, just hold up your phone's camera to the QR code there on your screen, or you can go to kgw.com/help. This is a micro donation, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how small or how big. Also, it's Monday, so let's hear some good news. We recently met this proud mom at a North Portland park.
Well, we just flew in from the Hudson Valley in New York for our son's opening of a new music venue on Adler Street in Portland.
What, any specific genre that he's going to be working with, or is it all kinds of music?
I think it's going to be all kinds of music, but what they're going to share in common, from what I understand, is it's going to be all about the dancing and the quality of the sound. So it's pretty exciting. He knows way more about this, obviously, than I do, but he said there's nothing else like this music venue in all of the city.
That does sound fun. The venue's called The Get Down. It's at 6th and Alder in Southeast Portland. Hey, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow night.
This is KGW News at 6:30.
And we begin at 6:30 with an update in another deadly shooting in Portland. A woman was killed overnight on Portland State's University campus. And this just into us.